and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosure big holes out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby, you made me a billion, plus I own a building, but each one of my children's children.
We are live. Welcome to Voice of Vine Radio. This is your host, Chris J, and it is a little after 9 Eastern Time and 6 over there on the West Coast. We have a great show in store for you. Tonight, we are talking about the one and only Bush family in depth, talk about the full level of this criminal syndicate that we've seen for the last 30 years plus in our government, going back before the times of before the fall of the Soviet Union, going really that's just in the public eye, and ultimately in the lesser scope, they've been in the government since the early 20th century, going almost all the way back to the turn of the century, and the Bush family has many people, many players that a lot of people don't know about, such as many people don't know who Neil and Marvin Bush are. These are brothers of George W. Bush we are talking about here. And very few people know who they are or know who Prescott Bush is, who was the father of the George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, his father, and then whose grandfather was Samuel P. Bush, Samuel Prescott Bush, which later his middle name would be his son's first name, who is pretty much the founder of the prominent era of the Bushes. So now you see that it goes all the way back to George W.'s great-grandfather, and you have a lot of people involved. You have the Bush family as at the known scope, Jeb, George W., H.W., which H.W. was around a lot longer than since when he was vice president of Reagan. That's when he became more into the public eye. But he went all the way back to the 60s, where he was in the CIA, prior to that even. But mainly when his prominence in the government became when he was in the 60s, and he was at a high-level position when the JFK assassination took place in Dallas, and he was in Dallas that day. At least that's what a lot of evidence shows. There's the picture of George H.W. appears to be walking down the steps of the Texas School Book Depository shortly after the assassination, as he was in the CIA at the time, and then later became the CIA director during the Vietnam War era, into the beginning of the Operation Condor, the notorious coup era, I guess you could call it, when the Pinochet was put into power. A lot of the South American operations went down. The closing of the Southeast Asian operation as the war ended. He was kind of at the beginning and set that in place, that era of meddling with the affairs of Latin America and this is third world in general, to the extent that the United States, via the CIA and other organizations in the government, did in the 60s and the 70s. With all that, the Bushes are a little bit more. Now you see that the scope of Bushes and their involvement with the government in general a little bit more than what you've seen on the TV over the last few decades. But it goes a lot further than what just few things I mentioned now. For example, Neil Bush is just a direct. He's a direct representation of the ultimate corruption. In the a lot of times the U.S. government, when they're trying to discredit a government that they don't like, they say that there's nepotism involved and corruption to a level like what. But ultimately, that's the kind of stuff that's happening in our government. And for example, when George W. was the president, and there was the No Child Left Behind Act, the notorious education acts that Bush did in the early 2000s, was No Child Left Behind, and he also did pretty much that set forth the have all these tests having to do, or all these schools having to do all these certain things to in order to get federal money. And his brother, Neil Bush, was a company called Ignite, which is like an education software program. They launched in '99, and after that, all that happened, school districts started using his software in their schools, which they have. It's like they introduced this dumbed down curriculum, and then his dumbed down curriculum software, he has it right there in store, waiting for when George W. does the plan of his education, quotation education advancements or plans. It's like they advanced the indoctrination. The indoctrination got worse and really set them forward to the point now where we have the Common Core and everything that we have now in the education system in America. George W. really set a lot of that in place, and his brother profited big time. At one point, he was making $180,000 a year off of this software program. And Neil Bush, it's funny, is that he mentioned, people are going to be looking up his name, trying to figure out, what does this guy look like? We don't know what he looks like. He practically hangs out in the shadows. While George W. and Jeb stay in the public spotlight. Neil and Marvin, but especially Neil, it seems like, who is shadiness has no bounds, it seems like. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Neil Bush's shadiness. Then it goes to the fact of he hung around prominent Russian billionaire Boris Berezovsky in the 2000s. He's now dead. He died in 2013. At this point, it was known that this guy was one of the big financiers of his education software program, and Boris Berezovsky was already known to be highly corrupt, and he was already like a fugitive status pretty much while he was awaiting trial, I think at the time, and then he left. Or no, I think he already had expatriated. I think he died in the UK, so he was a fugitive pretty much, and he was a fugitive oligarch that put in when he in the 2000s he threw a lot of the oligarchs in prison, and he was going to go to prison, but he left the country. And Neil Bush was known to have a pretty solid connection with this Russian billionaire, and as well as also other foreign interests. United Arab Emirates. Actually, no, it was not the United Arab Emirates. It was United Arab Emirates. Major CEO over there was another financier of his program. I think the guy's name Winston Wong, which was a Chinese computing whiz. He had a stake in as well, and there, of course, was the big Russian connection that he had over there with Boris Berezovsky, who, at the time, he was probably one of the most wanted men coming from Putin wanted to throw him in jail big time because at that time he pretty much he took over the 90s. He attempted to take over the media completely, and he did buy out the media completely, or he bought out Russia's biggest channel, Channel One, which that's how it had been formerly known as during the USSR on the privatization. So by buying into Russia's media and being one of the vultures that was just taking advantage of the whole collapsing situation, Berezovsky collected a ton of money. Plus, you imagine he probably was involved in a lot more than just the purchase of one Russian media channel. I can imagine he was involved with a lot more. I mean, there was all kinds of people were profiting off of the collapse of the Russian economy, or the near collapse of the Russian economy that happened. I mean, it didn't totally collapse, but it got very close. It was a major crisis that happened in the 90s under Yeltsin, under the government of the 90s, where Yeltsin, despite being highly unpopular with the people, especially by the mid-90s, he stayed in power mostly. A lot was the use of force. I mean, the parliament almost removed him from power in '93, and there was a serious rebellion inside of the Russian State Duma, but they decided, or he decided, just to bring in the tanks, and by force he shut down the movement, and Yeltsin eventually resigned 6 years later after he had done a ton of damage and let a lot of foreign investors buy up a ton of the Russian economy, causing that the 2000s to be a lot of billionaires inside of Russia that now Putin had to clean up, because now they practically owned the country, because Yeltsin had pretty much allowed this country to be 100% bought out by all these different Russian billionaires, with Kordosky, who's still has a ton of power and probably should have never been released from prison. Berezovsky, who was on the loose for many years, at least 10 years, and you can see those connections over here to the United States political elite, such as the Bush family, with Neil Bush and company. And the whole Bush family as a whole it's a story of corruption from the beginning all the way to the end. And, we don't know. I mean, the average American people seem to know maybe 5% of the true story of a lot of them, whether it's H.W. Bush's sketchy time in the CIA, with his involvement with all the sketchy stuff that the CIA was involved in the 60s, including the major one, November 22nd, 1963, which very much may have been the most major event in the 1960s in the United States, where JFK is assassinated, and they wanted us to believe that the magic bullet in the Lee Harvey Oswald theory of how it all went down. Of course, a lot of Americans didn't buy it, and for good reason, because it's absolutely ridiculous. At one point, 70% of Americans didn't buy the JFK story, but now it's down to, apparently now more recent numbers that shows actually went down to 56% are skeptical, rather than what used to be the overwhelming majority. 70% is definitely was a large majority to believe that the story couldn't be true, that Lee Harvey Oswald apparently practically defied the rules of marksmanship and the rules of physics, saying that he got those 3 shots off in 8 seconds and hit was 2 out of 3 times, when also all the accounts pretty much said that there was at least 6 shots fired. That's all about the only way that's possible. Tell me that a bullet can do all the crazy trajectory that they try to tell us that magic bullet did, that apparently went through Kennedy's neck, then out through through Kennedy's neck, and I believe they said it went I got it mixed up. To Kennedy's neck, through his arm or something like that, then through the feet, then through Connolly, first hitting his right arm, then his left arm, then his leg, and then falls on the floor, and the bullet's practically still intact. Where apparently bullets have that kind of a durability, they can do all that, and it wouldn't be in pieces. Apparently, again, the bullet must have been very magical for it, like I said, they call it the magic bullet. That's so these crazy circumstances actually went down that the lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, had everything go his way. Apparently, it's what they wanted us to believe. And yeah, don't mind H.W. Bush, who was high up in the CIA, who would later become a president, just 20-something years after that being there. That's just a coincidence. Don't worry about that. Also, don't worry about the fact that Israel happened to be mad at JFK at that time because he didn't want Israel to have nuclear weapons. When at that time Israel was developing a secret nuclear weapons program. Yet they complain all the time about how everyone else is developing, or how Iran is developing nuclear weapons illegally, apparently, when them and Pakistan are the only two countries in the area that have nuclear weapons, and they have their nuclear weapons illegally. It's not the irony right there of a lot of the actions that Israel does is that they criticize Iran for doing that. Well, that's how they got their nuclear weapons. And the United States president at the time was against them getting nuclear weapons, JFK. And apparently, and then he just happens to die, gets shot. Even the leaders later on said it in public that, for example, Gaddafi said that's what he believes, that Israel had definitely had a role in the JFK assassination because he didn't want Israel to have nuclear weapons, which that pretty much set up the era of Israel having a big leverage over Middle Eastern countries. Any Middle Eastern country that dares stand up to them, well, there's always the nuclear deterrent, and there can't, and that's why, for example, Syria or Iran really couldn't do anything against Israel because Israel has 411 nuclear weapons, and if they don't have anything to counter that with, and why would they? They're not crazy enough to actually press the button. Israel is crazy enough to press the button. They're ruled by sociopathic leaders such as Netanyahu or prior Ariel Sharon, or going back, the one that Begin, the one who said that Israelis are divine gods on this planet. They ultimately are very much, you hear these quotes about missiles as relish, and all these other quotes about how they're going to flatten Gaza. All these Israeli MPs I see saying this kind of stuff. It always sounds like the words that come right out of Hitler and the Nazi Party back in the 30s, and that's the ones that they're telling Iran is like the Nazis, that Iran is the one that's about to do some kind of nuclear holocaust or whatnot. But they're the ones that their MPs are calling for it, calling for the deportation of Palestinians, calling for the murder of Palestinians, and sometimes they even call for the rape of Palestinian women and the murdering of Palestinian children. That's what these Israeli MPs have been calling for other major Zionist fanatics inside the country. I mean, they're wearing T-shirts that have 2 shots, 1 kill, and one shot, 2 kills, and it's showing a pregnant pregnant Palestinian woman with a big crosshairs on her. That's the kind of stuff I would imagine. That's what sounds Nazi-ish right there. All the stuff that Israel does. But, that's a whole different. We're talking about the Bushes tonight, so I'm just gonna move on back to the Bushes. Even though that the Bushes, of course, they're all involved in the Project for a New American Century progression of the ultra no questions about Israelism, I guess you could call it. That nothing about Israel can be questioned. That if you do question Israel, then you're anti-Semitic, or that you are. They'll say that they'll say you're anti-Jewish, you're bigot, you're racist, all that good stuff. But Project for a New American Century pushed a lot of that stuff on the American people. Pushed it for that to really for it to go much faster than it already had been going through Operation Mockingbird and all these other Operation Mockingbird being the big one, which declared that there would be no more criticism of Israel in the media. And now it's progressed no longer to just the United States. Now it's the UK and a few other countries where they let their most senior, or most years, this guy had been there the longest time when it came to Middle East corresponding. And their best Middle East correspondent they released because he said that he saw no evidence of the human shields that Israel kept talking about. But and I think he also said about that he saw boys getting baited by the Israeli military then killed when all that stuff went down in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, when 2,000 Palestinian civilians were killed by the Israeli military all in just 1 month. And ultimately, Israel, what did they take? They took 40 people or something like that. 40 IDF were killed the entire operation. And like 3 Israeli citizens. And the only 80% of all the Palestinians that were killed during Operation Protective Edge were civilians. Only 20% were militants, and that's Israel's numbers. So, or I don't know if that's the official numbers. I would take that militants as a big asterisk on it. And of course, Israel is going to try to make it seem like they were all militants or militant connected somehow. And that, or that the only civilians that were killed were by mistake, but they're going to say all 3 to change up the story when it's convenient. That's how media coverage is. It's like they got a whole list. Well, if they don't believe that, we'll go to this one. We start off with what makes us sound the best for us. That makes us look like the good guys to the best. And then we go to number 2. Okay, it sounds a little bit worse on our end. And they got a few more before actually saying the real reason. That we were inflicting terror on innocent Palestinians going to the university or whatnot, like what they did when they bombed one of their major universities over there in Palestine, and left it looking like a hollowed out shell of what it used to be. That's and going back to the Bushes, and that it seems like it was the Bush era. They got everybody fixated on George W. Bush was the figure of getting everybody fixated on Islamic terrorism, and they became the figure of for a lot of Americans that fell for him. He became like the hero of the whole. He became the hero of kicking the terrorist ass. We're going over there. We're going to drop some freedom over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. They really started the ultimate. He was just the leader, the cheerleader of the ultra jingoistic, Islamophobic wave of so-called false patriotism that overtook America after 9/11. And at the same time, that the same Bush, Cheney, and the entire government were forming ISIS. And they were still funding Al-Qaeda, and that ultimately all that's happened is that the terrorists have gotten a lot stronger in those countries, and now that Iraq, they used to have 0 suicide bombings, and now having thousands of suicide bombings a year. They used to have practically none. And in Afghanistan, their opium production skyrocketed by 5,000%, and now there happens to be a pill problem / heroin problem inside the United States. Is that coincidental? We had our pill mills that were being pumping out these pills just a few years later after the invasion of Afghanistan, where now they have this huge opium operation coming out of Afghanistan. Very few Americans know that the soldiers over there, a lot of them are guarding opium fields poppy fields, that's what opium comes from, which later, when it's refined, turns to heroin, and also technically not heroin, synthetic heroin, oxycodone. That's the legal stuff, so it's perfectly safe. And tonight's show has been brought to you by oxycodone. Oxycodone, only slightly addictive. At least that's what we say. It's absolutely terrible though. You can laugh about it a little bit, but then when you think about it, is that what happened is that they got thousands, if not millions, of Americans on these correctly with these synthetic heroin pills. That was the Operation Afghanistan, because that's what it led to. Was that now they had all the supply that they were going to sell to the Americans or over to Europe, and as in heroin, and then they sold to Americans as synthetic heroin as a perfectly safe pill form. And when I mean perfectly safe, I mean highly fucking dangerous, highly fucking addictive. This stuff is just as addictive as heroin because it is heroin. Oxycodone, all these pills that were pumped out by Big Pharma in recent years, and then then it's like they talk about on the news or whatnot how addictive these pills are, and then a few days later you hear something like, "Oh, new pill 10 times stronger than oxycodone, made by Pfizer," and then you just shake your head, and it's like they're going to push this now on tons of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Americans. They're going to take this one that's 10 times worse or 10 times more addictive than the oxycodone. And then you hear on the same, or just a few minutes later, you hear something about, we found cannabis edibles over in these local high schools. Everybody freak out. Everybody, if you see these little gummy bears, freak out, confiscate them for your kids, shake them down, waterboard them. They start making it seem like that's the end of the world if your kid gets caught with one of these THC edibles or something like that. When ultimately, that should be the medicine that are given to these people that have, they're demonizing marijuana constantly. And even though that's a medicine that should be given to these people that have the pain problems and whatever that they're giving these horrible, addictive, synthetic heroin pills to. Even the states that have the medical marijuana, they have all these restrictions or whatnot, and they should make it very fucking easy. But yet, your doctor writes you a prescription note, and it takes 3 seconds, and you go to the pharmacy and you got your pills. There's sometimes shorter waits to go get these highly addictive oxycodone pills than there are to go to a Burger King or something like that. It shouldn't be like that, where people can get their hands on that stuff so easily, but they can't get themselves on life-saving THC, CBD medicines. And some states that even have technically legal medical marijuana because ultimately the government doesn't want that to succeed. They want to still be catering to the big pharma's interest and ultimately all the other industries' interests that will be affected if hemp comes through, which can replace so many industries, including even oil, that they can. They have hemp oil, they have hemp clothes. You're gonna have hemp paper. You're gonna have hemp plastic. Has ultimately oil is used to make plastic, so you have hemp oil, you make hemp plastic. So all this industries that would be under threat. Ultimately, William Randolph Hearst was the one that really pushed for the anti-marijuana campaign way back in the 1930s. Before that, it was pretty much legal. It was, I think it was just legal until at the point when he pushes reefer madness, all this stuff to scare people, because ultimately he was scared that hemp was going to take out his lumber industry, and ultimately just for paper and all the other stuff. Of course, that all the industrialists were probably quite happy to see hemp to no longer be in the competition, because also hemp can grow way faster than these trees that grow for years and years and years, and you come down and use it for paper. Hemp matures in less than 6 months? Or cannabis plant, which hemp is made from. Or actually, no, hemp is made, it's its own plant. but it's ultimately in the same family as the cannabis plant. They actually, of course, they actually make, or they can get cannabis from. I mean, it's like when you say the words marijuana and weed, ultimately it does play into a little bit those words were created by the anti-cannabis special interest way back when they want for marijuana was just a name that they that it was ultimately a name that just it was because part of the campaign to demonize cannabis was to make it sound foreign and also make it seem like they associated with the Negroes or black people, because at that time if associating with something with black people made it look bad, and also associated with Mexicans, and they gave it this Spanish sounding name, and voila, people started to disfavor it. Cannabis ultimately is a scientific name. I think that's the one maybe we should try to use, but I think at this point it doesn't really matter because the stigma of those names are gone, doesn't mean the same thing. But I mean, you have to ultimately, it's the whole principle of what we're talking about that counts. But of course, as I go off on these tangents that I do on the show, going back to what I was talking about with Bush and all that, is that he started, or he was the one that the big interest, the New World Order, the corporatists, they're ultimately behind this government. Well, they used him as the president that would initiate this war, which is ultimately just oil, banking, and opium. And opium, which went up 5,000%, of opium production out of Afghanistan, really fueled the pill problem inside this country and the heroin problem in Europe, and eventually now coming to the United States. Now there's these horrible statistics coming out of Seattle, these northwestern cities, of tons of people are now addicted to heroin there because now they can't afford or they can't get their hands on the pills, so now they're going to heroin. It's absolutely terrible that it's absolutely terrible that this all went down like this. We've had, for example, in some areas you have these horrible statistics coming out, hundreds of people in just a small area, ODs in 1 year, like what we had at the height of the pill mill problem. Now it's moved into a heroin problem across this country, and people can't put two and two together that the heroin problem is caused by the pill problem that this country had, which is pushed by Big Pharma. And ultimately, because the start of it was the opium production going sky high in Afghanistan, which people don't know that the Afghanistan war led to that, nor that there's a true purpose of the Afghanistan war is actually to get more, to guard those pocket plants and then ultimately for the Big Pharma and for the United States CIA's illicit trade of drugs that they're involved in. Hey, I went into the chat room actually, and I think I beat somebody to the joke about the tonight's sponsor, or the sponsor of Voice of Rebellion Radio. But Citigroup, though, I didn't mention, or Citibank. Yeah, yes, of course, think about the banks. Also, Afghanistan, Iraq apparently didn't have a Rothschild bank until the war happens. Of course, that's the major reason that when you talk about the Afghanistan-Iraq war, that they're involved there. I think that ultimately, though, what is a little bit confusing about that whole scenario, though, is that Saddam was a United States ally for 12 years solid, all the way from 1979 to 1991. So why was it? I wonder how true was the reason about. I feel like Saddam never left being a United States ally, and I feel like the motives were just purely out of they had to retire Saddam. That he knew too much, and it was time. It wasn't really more. It was less than. It wasn't really that he was a leader that really opposed their agenda, because Saddam was still ultimately anti-Iran, and he had kind of fell apart and became estranged from Assad, and the actual, resistance sphere inside the Middle East, the people that actually oppose Zionism and all that, those few countries, Saddam kind of fell out of that group, and it kind of became isolated. So I'm not exactly sure whether I'm not exactly sure whether or not that was the apparent reason. I think it was just more like they were trying to put in a different puppet. But ultimately, it kind of backfired, didn't it? Because their plan led to now the current government in Iraq, which Iraq's current government hasn't been playing ball with the United States. If you haven't caught up with what's actually been going on in the last 2-3 years, he's been working with Assad and Iran, which Iraq hasn't done since May ever. I don't even think Iraq was doing that in the pre-Saddam era. Originally, Saddam and Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, were allies, sort of, but then they fell apart pretty quickly because Hafez al-Assad saw Saddam to be pretty much just a tyrant and a man hungry for power, and then Hafez also just didn't see eye to eye with him. But before that, a little bit of history before that is that before Saddam, there was a government that was getting the reason why Saddam had the popularity was because people didn't like that their leader that they had way back, Qasim, was getting cozy with the Soviet Union. And I think a lot of people didn't like that. A lot of nationalists inside the country sided with the Bosses coup that happened and brought about Saddam, who was one of the people in the coup, and who eventually became the leader. But ultimately, the era of Bossism went before Saddam, who officially took power in 1979. But I see somebody made a comment about he had cannabis and 9/11 conspiracy videos in his compound. Remember, what's Bin Laden in the whole, apparently they had to respect him and they had to bury him at sea, which is apparently an Islamic tradition, which I don't think I've heard really anything that actually proves that claim, that being buried at sea is an Islamic tradition. But anyways, with Bin Laden, apparently he was killed despite the fact that he had died like 2 times before already. Remember, Fox News reported that Bin Laden died back in December of 2001 from natural causes. And one of his bodyguards, or a supposed bodyguard that he claimed he worked with the CIA, said he died in 2006. And there was also another time where he walked out the back door. Remember, apparently that Bin Laden walked out the back door of the place where he was getting fired upon by Delta Force and everybody, and he escaped. And there was a few other times where he just escaped by, he was a few hundred yards from being killed. Apparently, there was huge battles being fought. Somehow he escaped. He escapes another time. I mean, he rides the goat out of there. These fucking fake stories that they had about these absolutely ridiculous stories, and people actually bought the fact that a former CIA agent, which they didn't know that to be the fact, but went in a cave, formed a group of ragtag terrorist groups that somehow these cavemen got 19 people's box cutters to bypass the world's highest or most secured security on the entire world. Somehow hijacked these planes, flew it into the World Trade Center, happened to have been insured by somebody that I'll mention a little bit later, or not insured, but the security was done by somebody that I was going to talk about later. Then also went into the Pentagon. Apparently these planes disappear, vanish. No really traces the wreckage, the luggage. No one can find that. The people, no one can find that. No one can find a damn screw at Pennsylvania and Shanksville. But apparently all that happened. They spend 10 years trying to find them, and then 10 years later they find them and kill him, and then they throw his body out to sea so no one can ever find him. So I think that and then later, a couple years later, they said the stuff that they found as they said they was researching 9/11 truth videos or something like that, which I don't know what exactly they were trying to say there. but I think Bin Laden was just an actor in the whole 9/11 false flag, and that's why his family got flown out of the country. There was practically no planes flying that day, but one plane was the Bin Laden family leaving the country. And somebody mentioned in the chat room about the whole burying the sea, is that burying at sea is as Islamic as a supposedly a devout Muslim owning a bar, drinking, or hanging out with Las Vegas strippers. I think that I don't think I've ever actually seen. I have a lot of Muslim friends on Facebook and talk with them. I talk with quite a few of them a lot, and none of them ever mentioned that. I never seen anything about burying this at sea. I never see any kind of mention that, and I'm pretty sure that they probably think that's why you don't even hear them responding to the claims, because they probably just figure that we should know that's 100% bullshit, because to me it just sounds ridiculous. I mean, it's one of those things that Americans couldn't catch, but it's like the Flight 93 disappeared into the ground of Pennsylvania, or the people they're looking at a little small hole that apparently this plane went through at the Pentagon, and they're expecting us to believe that a plane went through it and these people died in there, and they couldn't find the bodies, and they couldn't find luggage or anything. And they say that and then they say that Pennsylvania, that they show us this little, looks like a ditch that they dug into the ground, and a little bit of discoloration in the grass, and they're trying to say that this is where the wings went through, and this is where the plane vaporized. Apparently the plane completely vaporized, and apparently they think that we never saw a plane crash ever before. And they're telling us they're telling us that a plane crashed there. They didn't even have. I mean, if a plane actually crashed there, like what they said, there'd be debris for a mile away. There'd be a whole really gory scene with bodies everywhere. I mean, we saw what happened with MH17 that got hit. Oh yeah, remember the fake story that they tell us that this thing got hit by a missile or whatnot, and that the plane was mostly intact. Well, that thing got shot down out of the sky by West Ukrainian fighter jets. Which, talk about the West Ukraine and all that. We haven't. Of course, I told you guys a little bit earlier about the Neil Bush and all his connections over there to the Russian oligarchs that didn't like Putin. And Neil Bush to this day, I think he still got it. He still makes a ton of money off his software program and whatnot. And I bet Neil Bush to this day is probably still talking with those. He's probably working with people like Kordosky or whatever, to try to take out Putin. He's probably some kind of ambassador to this day, because that's been one of the major goals by the West. Even though that the very unlikely goal is to take out Vladimir out of power, because he doesn't play ball with them. In 2006, he kicked out the Rothschilds, and they don't have a Rothschilds bank at this point. But I think they can try all they want. They tried to kill a certain guy from Cuba for 638 times. I saw he has a Guinness Book of World Records for surviving the most amount of assassination attempts, including apparently a poison cigar. What was the next? They saw something about poison ink. There's a few famous plots that they did against them, and then there's all the other lesser known plots. I mean, it's like you said. If surviving assassination attempts is an Olympic sport, I would win a gold medal. Which now I think if you making it to 90 after all the assassination attempts, that's an extra gold medal right there. But the 638, that quantity right there is definitely deserving a gold medal. And the screw the CIA, screw United States imperialism Olympics. And going back to the Bushes, Oh, there's another Bush brother that you don't hear much about, Marvin Bush. He's only been mentioned a little bit recently because he was refusal to. He didn't endorse Donald Trump. In fact, he refused, or he endorsed Gary Johnson, who Gary Johnson. Unfortunately, I've said a lot of good things about him, but when this shady fucking character that is Marvin Bush endorses him, I have to definitely take a step back and look at what might be the deal with him. And I look at Gary Johnson. I see that just a few years ago, he was saying how he was bragging about how he met with Netanyahu and Ariel Sharon over there in Israel, and he was bragging about his pretty much how he thinks of, or he was talking about how he thinks Israel should remain an ally and all that. And the only thing he talked about against is whether or not that Israel should preemptively strike Iran. Which, some hardcore fanatic Zionists will say that definitely in the United States. They'll say that Israel should preemptively strike Iran. But that's the only thing that Gary Johnson really different from was the Zionist lobby. But when we talk about whether they should even exist or not, ultimately in that question, a true candidate would say that actually knows about the Israel-Palestine scenario and actually cares how that ends up. A candidate would say that Israel does not have any claim to their land, and that ultimately we should be looking at a peaceful solution, and not so peaceful. Well, hopeful. I mean, you probably can't say that, but a peaceful solution to giving back to letting Palestine reclaim their rightful land. What I mean by not so peaceful solution is what's probably going to be the ultimate scenario. It's also like Russia invading Israel in 20, 30 years, and ultimately having to go into a very ugly fight with the Israeli military if they don't fucking blow up the planet in doing so, or blow up half the planet doing so, because they do have 411 nuclear weapons, and that's a lot. I don't know how many major cities there are on the planet, but 411 nuclear weapons would have a big coverage, and so Russia better watch out if they're going to do that. But Russia said they're going to work to give Palestine their own country. And originally, there's been a standoff between Netanyahu and Putin. And Netanyahu is also looking to. I see that he's trying to influence Erdogan, which I don't know if he should be trying to do that, but I think he's definitely looking at somehow making some kind of alliance with Turkey. I'm having Turkey, Iran, and Syria and Yemen to play with in the region, which would definitely give him a lot of. It definitely have a lot of chips to put on the table if Putin has that. So if this is a big move possibly he might be doing when it comes to the whole Middle Eastern plan, because one of Israel's biggest allies has been Turkey for many years. But now Erdogan seems to no longer have quite the same interest in joining NATO, or at least he's pretending to in the last few weeks, ever since the coup happened, which he keeps blaming on the United States. Now, I believe that first that Gulen was just made controlled opposition, and that this is just an attempt to consult. Or I just believe that he's just trying to consolidate his power. That was me thinking, hey, Gulen's a controlled opposition. Now, I'm starting to think that maybe Erdogan's actually he's changed his mind. He might be trying to pull like a Mugabe, but Mugabe only waited a few years to so-called switch sides, and he stopped playing ball with the British and the United States, and then started doing his own thing after independence. But I think that Erdogan, after 18 years, who knows, might be doing a rather unprecedented move and actually switching sides over to Putin rather than going to rather than still being in, or rather than staying in NATO. I was going to say they're joining NATO. They actually are in NATO. They're a NATO country. Joining the EU is what they're about to do, which has really caused a lot of backlash inside of Europe, because they're saying, well, they're not even European. Why are they about to join the EU? Turkey's a Middle Eastern country. They're not a European country. Only a little part of the country that's geographically in Europe, and politically the country's in the Middle East. And so there's been this recent development with all that, and I think that ultimately it's going to end up in. I have a feeling, though, in the end that Turkey and the United States are going to somehow make up, and Putin's not going to be really able to I don't think he's going to switch them over. But when I don't think Putin really has the interest of reaching out to Turkey after all they've done in Syria and meddled with Syria's affairs and ultimately, indirectly, has gotten a few Russian soldiers killed over there because there's been a few Russian soldiers killed in this combat operation in Syria in the last year or so. And Turkey has been some of the ground troops inside of Syria that have been working against the Russian troops inside of Syria and have been working with the Syrian rebel groups, you can say in quotation, but they're really the Syrian terrorist groups. So, and it's definitely a little bit different though than a few, 10, 11 years ago, back at the early stages of the Iraq War. You had, at that point, it was, it's not so different. It's really ultimately very much similar in how the United States is viewed by a lot of countries. They just see Obama to be, they see it as like a George W. Obama scenario, and they don't see any real differences. And I don't think a lot of countries or a lot of people realize there is no differences between the presidents because they're just ultimately corporate spokesmen. They're not actually, don't have any real power over what goes on. And I think the view inside of Middle Easterners, you have 81% of the Iraq people believe that the United States is helping ISIS. Very few people actually believe that the lie of the United States is fighting ISIS in Iraq or in Syria. They also don't think that they also don't believe that the United States' end result will be very, very good when they look over Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and those are countries that the United States are allied with in the Gulf, those Gulf Arab states, and how bad of dictatorships they are with how little freedom they have. And I saw that little comment, though. One picture was Hillary Clinton. I don't know what's the other girl's name, the actress. But the one was they're holding up the donuts, and Hillary Clinton's got the donut with the stretched out hole, and then the actress, she's got the more tighter hole. Which obviously there's a little bit of a other meaning that's being suggested there. But I see every now and then a picture with like Hillary Clinton, and she's not aware of how ridiculous she looks. She looks like with all the stuff she's done. Like, remember that one picture where she's got the beer and she's filling it up with. She's trying to act like she can draft it. She can't even draft her own beer, but she's trying to act like she drafts her own beer, and then like only a third of it's actually water and most of it's head. And then people, that led up to a lot of jokes, people saying stuff like, it's like, or even with beer, she can't give good head. That's why her lack of giving good head has been the reason why. That's the reason why Bill Clinton cheated, that kind of stuff. Which is probably a lot more reasons than that. Plus, I believe with all these presidential affairs, I don't think that these are a real marriage even happens with leaders, and as those leaders on practically, as for example, you really think that Bill Clinton was the only one that was, Bill Clinton and JFK were the only ones that were unfaithful in the White House? Yeah, right. And there are leaders of a country with a lot of money, with a lot of power. They're gonna have women all over them. It's like, doesn't matter what country it is. There's always, people criticize, try to criticize the Bolivian president, try to make a scandal out of a supposed affair that he had, or they try to criticize Putin for having a 30-year-old girlfriend. It's like, well, that's just what happens with leaders. That's the stuff that I don't really focus on. I focus on who's owned by the Rothschild bankers, who's doing wars where, who's meddling with the affairs of other countries, who's jailing their own citizens for just talking out against them. That's the kind of stuff I'm going to focus on. I don't know about all the rest of it. Today I saw some more bullshit on my Facebook. It was people that I went to high school with, and it's bad when these people have no connections to Venezuela and they have very little knowledge of the situation. So the only thing they're going to receive is from the mainstream media or Facebook. And I talk all the time about the true situation inside of Venezuela. It's not like what all these alarmists are saying, and all these people that are mostly, what the alt-right has been saying about Venezuela, how bad it is, that Maduro's destroying their country, that this is how socialism always ends up. And I'm like, just, stop right there for a second. Number one, they don't have a Rothschild banks. Now you can see there's a big motive for the media to lie about them. You see these isolated pictures of apparently riots at a supermarket here or whatnot. You guys have riots when you have plenty of stuff in the store because they said that's a little bit cheaper over there on Black Friday. And then they go on to say that they have no food here and all over the place. Look at this picture of an empty supermarket. I'm like, well, that picture was taken in New York City. So one of the famous pictures of apparently empty shelves at a Venezuelan supermarket is from New York City. And then you look at the people spreading the lies, and a lot of the people that push this propaganda, and that's the people that have a lot of interest, which is the right-wingers inside of Venezuela who want to take power once Maduro falls, if he falls. I'm not going to say once he falls because I don't think he's going to fall, because a lot of the people in the country still support him, contrary to what the media says. Now, he's became a little bit less popular because he's trying to fill one of the greatest leaders in South American history who, kept a lot of the poor inside of Venezuela's standard of living from very poor to middle class, education, food, and really better the lives of a lot of them. And then you're expected to compete with that guy. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of a letdown when you're not as good as that guy. But also, there has been a little bit of economic troubles, but it's not caused by really internal factors. It's external factors such as sanctions that are coming from the United States and countries that want to crumble, making Venezuela's economy crumble, making it very hard to trade with anybody because they are looking at the oil, that Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia, and they want to put a Rothschild bank there and take over Venezuela, or Venezuela's economy. Number two, there's the oil prices that went down all around the world, where now oil has went down. At one point, was down into $20-something a barrel, which is $50 a barrel is remarkably cheap. So that's what Venezuela used to have the advantage of when Venezuela's oil was at a much higher cost. The oil market was selling at much higher rates. They stayed at $50 a barrel, so they got a ton of the world's business. But the thing is, it's being artificially dropped by countries like Saudi Arabia. They're not really getting a profit. Sorry, guys, dropped off there for a second, apparently. But I was just mentioning the whole Venezuelan scenario and what it's equivalent. The oil market has definitely dried up a little bit around the world, and now it's oil being sold at $20 a barrel. This drought has affected not just Venezuela, but Colombia and countries that are not socialist, and also not enemies of the United States as well. Colombia, but being enemies of the United States, Venezuela is being sanctioned, making it very hard to trade with anybody. But Colombia is actually suffering an economic crisis of their own. Food prices went up 8 times recently, and no one talks about them. You know, they show these pictures over and over again of apparently a riot inside of a Venezuelan supermarket. When there's shit in your own stores here in the United States, but the prices go down a little bit, and people fucking riot, punch each other, tase each other. You know, you guys act like fucking animals here in the United States when Black Friday happens, and you know you feel like it's. You realize that just because it doesn't just mean the products are low. It means one thing could have been low. There's all kinds of contextual issues there that you just take whatever the mainstream media fucking says. And if they say this is the reason it happened, then that's why you're going to believe it. And you're going to believe that video is not from something totally different. Might not be from the same country. Like I said, the one picture that they showed was from New York City. And I see these people saying about how bad of Maduro is a leader or whatnot. And at the same time, they'll go on to support Barack Obama and talk about how they're voting for Hillary Clinton. Which Hillary Clinton there was emails showing that she was a saboteur in Venezuela against the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan people. A ton of their people still support Maduro, and ultimately it shouldn't be up to them to decide whether or not he goes. Not you guys over here and people, alt-right trolls on the internet. Get into another internet war when anybody counters what to say. It's like, I saw this video of outside the RNC. Some guy was asking, he asked why this guy had a science that socialism sucks. And then he started to ask him about, he mentioned Venezuela and what's going on there. And he started, you know anything about Venezuela? You know that they're about these sanctions. And then he starts going about the sanctions, and he was clueless. He had no idea what the sanctions even meant. But yeah, there's heavy sanctions against Venezuela, similar to what the embargo was against Cuba for many, many years. Still, really, to this day, the embargo continues. It hasn't been totally lifted. So the sanctions against Venezuela, to the extent that they have, and people still blame whatever other factors. They just believe this is an internal problem totally. But anyways, it's just the fact that I've explained this how many times about the oil, about the sanctions, and that I have friends over there down in Venezuela that are countering what the media has to say over here in the United States, and what all these supposed, the Cato Institute. Come on, the fucking Cato Institute. That's who you're going to cite. Ultimately, these are a bunch of. These people are other vultures that try to say that, oh, we're not as bad as those vultures over there in the United States government. We're not any way connected with them, even though that we will support the bombing of Venezuela if it means that we get the free market and get to take advantage of their oil, and we get to take advantage of their, and then they would love to see the Rothschild Bank put in place there, and then the market, and then they'd be opened up to people, all the predatory investors. Kind of like what happened to Russia in the 90s when all the predatory investors came by and bought everything up, and outsider forces took over the economy. That's what happened in Venezuela. Outsider forces will take over their economy if it's ever denationalized. I'm not saying that Maduro is perfect. I'm not saying that even Chavez is perfect. No person's perfect. But I'm saying that they're a whole lot better than the level of crazy that the United States would bring to Venezuela, and a whole lot better than Andres Frez and the dictatorship that was there before, that the United States supported for many years, that most people that talk shit about Venezuela know very little about. And I bet the chat room's going off because I can hear it making those click sounds. Even though I'm not on the browser, I can still hear when it makes the click sounds. But let's see. And I'm trying to go back, see a lot of stuff. I'm trying to catch back where I was earlier. Hopefully it doesn't drop off again. but I just want to see how the chat room is going right now. And also, and apparently one of the big reasons also they wanted to take out Hugo Chavez for all is the Bilderberg didn't like the fact that Chavez was doing the $50 a barrel rate, which was not the set rate that the Western countries agreed on to sell oil at, because that's part of the thing that they do. The Bilderberg Committee set commodity prices, and it's ultimately not a free market whatsoever. It's what they're setting up. It's a corporatist economy. A lot of stuff is planned out by the big corporate CEOs and all the few people that attend the Bilderberg Committee. I mean, it's like 100,000 people show up to this Bilderberg Committee every year, and they set out a lot of the major commodity prices for the next year. Who's going to be the president of the United States? What is the next war they're going to do? I mean, this major stuff. That's what's talked about at the Bilderberg Committee. And yeah, I got a pretty big crowd in the chat room, but as I heard all the clicking sound, I thought I'd set off. So I was hoping that a few of the ANCAPs or whatever, the alt-righters, the early alt-righters, I mean, those people, that's not, anarcho-capitalist. I mean, they bring up some good points quite a bit, but talk about the alt-righters, that's a little bit different. The alt-right is like those people that start, they love to use the word cuck. I don't know what that's about. I don't know why they just, which apparently it took me a while to even find out what the hell that word meant. And apparently it means something like that you let your wife bang other dudes and you watch or something like that. And apparently there's something racial about it, though, like that the dudes are black. I don't know. That's what I've found on the internet, that it meant something like that. I honestly, I never even heard the word until I started seeing it all over the place by these dudes. And I mean, if somebody's got a better definition, someone put that in the chat, because I don't want to use that as the definition, and then that's not the definition, but apparently it is. I mean, and then these alt-righters are also the same ones that say race mixing's wrong and stuff like that. And that, this is pretty much the mentality that if you're a white dude and you sleep with anybody that's not white, then you are a race traitor, race mixer, anti-European, cultural genocidalist, or something like that. And then it goes, and then apparently if you are then they say, like, if the alt-righters they'll say, like, if you're black, if you're black, Hispanic, Asian, or Muslim, or anything else that's not white, then, not Muslim, Arab, and then you sleep with a white woman, then shame on you because you're participating in the cultural genocidalist, multicultural diversity, killing of the white society, or something like that. But and then there's also the same people, they talk about the free market, but the free market in quotations, and how much they love their, it's the one that they always talk about when these economists. I mean, I feel like von Mises is usually a little bit more respectable crowd talks about Ludwig von Mises, but no, Milton Friedman, that's the guy, that scumbag, the one that supported Pinochet, the fascist, that break the economy for the corporations. I mean, if you talk about it in literal terms, everything but a free market, yeah, that guy, who the University of Chicago still I think the University of Chicago is named or dedicated to, and they still are. And then all these people are practically infatuated by this guy, this Milton Friedman or whatever. That's like the one of the worst economists. When I see that guy quoted for just about anything, it's like you can pretty much disregard it because you know that the person that probably quoting him is probably a little bit biased. It's not like that's why I said a little bit more respectable crowd, even though it's technically, I guess they'll try to say that they're in the same category. Ludwig Mises and Milton Friedman, but Ludwig Mises was is quoted by people that know a little bit more about economics than the so-called alt-right crowd. And nobody really. Oh yeah, here it is. Somebody finally confirmed. Somebody finally confirmed the definition of cuck, or I confirmed, or at least gave me a definition, which looks a little bit different. Wait to see. It's a new. I know it's not. I know it's not really a new word, but I know it's definitely a. Well, actually, I thought it might have been a new word, but it's just a word that you don't see too often used, so it's kind of weird when people use it. Says this guy Baconator 1000 said, "Cuck is just some guy whose woman is cheating on him regardless of the color of the guy." Okay, I don't know. Thanks for the definition that you gave me. But going back to the show and actually talk about the Bush family, I'll think about that is, I guess, talk about interracial marriages. Let's go back to Jeb Bush. And, it's kind of funny is that I was looking through Jeb Bush, and apparently he was down in Mexico that's where he met his current wife, who is Mexican, and then they have their, he apparently speaks pretty good Spanish, and that she didn't even know when they first were together. She didn't even know English. I wonder though what was Jeb Bush actually doing down there in Mexico at that time. Maybe he was probably involved in some, was his dad was the CIA drug running or something like that. Apparently, he was just a good old, a good guy doing a good service teaching English as a second language to some poor Mexican people down there. That's what the official story of what Jeb Bush was doing down there. That's how he met his wife back in the 70s, which, the old Papa Bush was just out of the CIA. I think at that point he officially moved up to Congressman Bush. I don't know if you could call that move up, but it's probably a easier job because congressmen don't even show up to work half the time, and they don't really have they don't have a lot of responsibility. CIA director, imagine there's a ton of shady shit you got to review, and imagine it's not so much an easy job, but definitely have a lot of power as a CIA director. I believe Papa Bush was in Congress in the 60s, and then later on, by the 80s was his big break, I guess you could say, because 84 he becomes the vice president under Reagan, and then in 88 he becomes the president. Oversees the Gulf War, which some people call the first nuclear war, because the use of depleted uranium by the United States soldiers, which got a lot of American troops sick. A lot of people over there sick with they blame it on a lot of stuff, but uranium's a contributing factor with the disease of Gulf War syndrome. Apparently, it's the spread in many different ways, and a lot of people got sick of it. And over there it was an absolute disaster. And we know that ultimately what stopped in the Gulf War, probably stopped the United States from going any further, is the fact that Saddam lit all the oil fields on fire, leaving the United States has nothing to take. But then the United States puts out one last thing with a vengeance. They leave and drop a ton of bombs on a convoy of Saddam's troops going back to Iraq. And there's the picture of this convoy. Everybody's killed, and all these burn-up cars all bunched up together. That was the very classy act to treat retreating soldiers like that, but it happened, and that was the Gulf War. And then the United States came back a few years later in or in 2003 they come back later, just and that took out Saddam once and for all with George W. Bush and took over Iraq for the short time. And now they have this tricky situation that they got themselves into now. Now, I think ICE is what its true goal is, and it's the same as in Syria, that ISIS is there to take out the current government because they're not really cooperating with the United States, and they would want to take out Bashar al-Assad for a long time. I mean, you see emails in 06 talking about this, but I think they're trying to do the same thing over there in Iraq. And maybe they'll push them into Iran next. And that way they might try to take all these countries over without even actually putting too many soldiers over there. And the comment somebody left there, and the Jeb Bush met his wife at Chipotle left. Jeb Bush met his wife at Chipotle. I mean, that was almost as believable as apparently that he just by chance met her in a class that he was teaching English over there. I bet it was somehow arranged, but I mean, what I saw is that apparently she was just a poor village girl, or not so poor actually, because she got into a private school, but she was from a poor village or something like that, and she had a somewhat rich family. So I know her last name's Gallo. So I didn't really get a lot of time to look into that, who the Gallos. I bet that's some kind of Mexican, some kind of crony government that the Mexican government's really close in with, or something like that. Probably something similar to, who knows, there might be something close to their version of the Bushes, but I know they don't have, I don't think there's been a few presidents with the last name Gallo, but with her connection, she ended up being able to have the life that she has now, with now living a very luxurious life down there in Coral Gables, Florida, where Jeb Bush and her live. Of course, Jeb Bush. When I see Jeb Bush, sometimes I wonder, maybe George W.'s not quite the dummy of that when it comes to those four brothers. I think that George W. might not be the dumbest one. Jeb Bush sometimes really seems, I don't think he's really dumb. More like he just doesn't have a personality and is a very bad speaker. I mean, that's why they didn't pick him to be. I don't think he'll ever be the president, and they'll never pick him to be the president because of how low energy and how boring it is ultimately. I mean, he got roasted. He got fucking roasted by Trump in the debates, and I mean, ultimately the powers that be could have stopped that from happening, or may not. I feel like they could have stopped it. But Trump, I mean, absolutely brought called him low energy Jeb and stuff like that. But he roasted everybody. It was like, he roasted him for being low energy. He roasted Marco for being little and called him Marquito. I mean, come on, you call him in his own language, or what he always claims, claiming that he's from the United States. Never mind, but still, he always claims about his Hispanic heritage or whatever, or his so-called Hispanic heritage, and he called him Marquito. Ted Cruz, lying Ted Cruz. I mean, definitely not a. Trump's, of course, just another actor in the game, but you gotta admit that they made an entertaining show with all the roasting and all the debates this time. Wow, the chat room really blew up. But Jeb Bush is the Fredo Corleone of the Bushes. I think that Jeb Bush is definitely the most boring one. George W. is kind of the clown, but he went to Harvard and everything. And you see him actually talk in a normal setting. It's mostly an act. It was just an act to get some of the most gullible, most and muster up from false patriotism. But George W. was mostly it was quite a bit. A lot of it was an act, and he was just an actor, really. But there was, with all the Bushes and stuff like that. I mean, was that all that stuff planned? I don't know so much, because some of the stuff doesn't look like it could have been planned. But there's been a lot of funny moments with not just George W. There was a couple with there was one with HW that was just absolutely hilarious when he started throwing up on the Japanese prime minister way back back about 25 years ago when he was meeting with the Japanese prime minister. He starts throwing up all over the guy, and then Barb was trying to cover up his mouth was but he's still throwing up. I can just imagine how everybody after that was looking. Apparently, he throws up for a while, and she's trying to stop it. That must have been some pretty nasty food. I don't know what the hell they served them. George Bush was just strategizing the shit out of the American people. I was getting baconator when Sal wasn't saying that. Now you're gonna have me convinced I gotta do one of them George Bush impressions again. What was it? Like that one time when he says about the fool or shame on you, or fool me once, shame on you. Yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. But you can't fool me again. And I didn't see any real evidence that was a assassination attempt. That when he puked on the Japanese prime minister, but I would like to see some evidence that that's true. But at the very minimum, it was just a pretty funny moment with Barbara and George W. And then there's the not so funny side of the Bush family, which is the shady ass Marvin Bush. And as I said, Marvin Bush, I didn't even get to the point of what first he came up to prominence in the 80s with Silverado Loans, which was as corrupt as at one time Silverado Loans gave a loan to its owner, to the owner, Marvin Bush. This was when his dad was which is George H.W., was the president of the U.S. at that time, or the vice president. It was in the late 80s. And the business collapsed, and there was a huge scandal about how corrupt it was, and there was all kinds of stuff that was being implied and being accused of. And yeah, at the end, he should have went to jail, but then he got away with a $50,000. I think it was a $50,000 fine, which is pennies practically. What kind of money that Marvin Bush was making. Then a few years later, he comes back into prominence. He comes in the board of directors in 1993. Around the time the World Trade Center has their first bombing. This Bush this Bush with his insurance company gets with Securicom a contract at the World Trade Center, and also has Washington Dulles Airport, was the security company. Securicom was doing security for the World Trade Center, I think all the way up to possibly when the towers came down. He was on the board of directors until shortly before the towers came down. It was June 2000 he stopped being on the board of directors. And then 2002, right after the World Trade Centers come down, this company ceases to exist, Securicom. Now, Marvin Bush is just one more of this of the shady Bush family. I mean, there's Prescott and Samuel, which I haven't really gone to, but I'll get to them in a little bit about the full. That really, when you see what Samuel, especially, because you don't even hear that name, even in the alternative media, too much. You don't hear Samuel Prescott Bush talk about, but ultimately, without him, Samuel Prescott Bush wouldn't, or without him, the Bush family would have never been quite in the same prominence. But apparently, the Bush family's been around quite a while because apparently their family goes back to since 1647 or something like that in the United States, when the first Bushes came over. But I don't know if I really buy that. I see stuff that apparently the Bushes might have been a little bit more German than some people. Then what is said, I don't know about that. I think that this claim that they're just an original American family, I mean, it might be possible that they got over here in 1647 with some favors or something like that. There were some, the Bush family goes back a long time, but Samuel P. really brought them to the prominence that they would be in the 20th century to lead up to the point where they have two people become two presidents, only one president apart separating them between George H.W. and George W. Yeah, somebody mentions it. Somebody mentioned about MC Marvin Bush and the Dancing Israelis. I guess that would be an interesting name for a band or group. Let's see. Just trying to look through the chat and see what some people had to say. With the Full Frito ones, shame on me. Full Frito again. away, we won't be fooled again. And the Bushes, with all their involvement around 9/11 attacks, and has become finally more out there about the truth about 9/11 to an extent. We still don't have to, very few people know about the Israeli involvement in 9/11. Just seems to be some people in the alternative media really know to the extent. Was the 60 Israelis arrested on the day of 9/11 and released shortly after? What about the van full of explosives that we saw on the George Washington Bridge? And what about, as well, we have the dancing Israelis. They're dancing while this plane hits the buildings, and they're there to just happen to document the event. What event? How would they know that 9/11 was happening unless they had some foreknowledge? What about the mural vans? I mean, you're going to tell me that these fucking vans had literally a picture of the Twin Towers getting hit by a plane on the day that 9/11 happens? Urban moving system vans. These vans just happen to coincidentally be going around town. There were 911 calls and everything about these suspicious white vans, the Mossad vans. And with all, I mean, it's so common knowledge at this point inside, or not common knowledge. It's so inside the alternative media it is, but it's so so open. It's so easy to find this stuff. I mean, it just takes 5 seconds to look it up on YouTube or whatnot, the videos of this stuff, and people still refuse to do it. People still refuse to find out these basic facts that they need to know. And it's how many years has it been? Over 14 now? And still people refuse on the basic, on some of the basic facts about 9/11. And finally, it seems like what became somewhat of a viral campaign is, all these people saying Bush did 9/11, but I almost don't like to say it because it simplifies it too much. Bush was a main collaborator in 9/11, but there's all the other people, Cheney telling NORAD to stand down. Netanyahu is the one that said that Israel benefited a lot from 9/11. And what about the fact that over there in Israel, you see people dressing up on the day of Purim, apparently? I don't know, I never really fact-checked that, but with the big Twin Towers. And what about the fact that about all the Israeli Mossad vans going around New York City on 9/11, 60 Mossad agents being arrested? What about all of that? What about the fact of how it really benefited when you look at a geopolitical level when it comes to getting Americans on their side? I mean, after that, it seemed like now it's gone to the point, again, with Project for a New American Century and people like Kagan and all these other people that were also heavily tied around 9/11, all these think tanks that were heavily tied around 9/11, is now you can't even question Israel. Now there is no questioning. If you question anything, you're anti-Jewish, you're racist, and you will be all this bad stuff will happen to you, apparently. And apparently, it said stuff about George Bush was under investigation. Somebody said George Bush was under investigation for his murder when his dad was the vice president at that point. And Neil Bush was also under investigation for his fraudulent company, and then he got off with basically paying pennies compared to the money he had made off of some gullible people that were in that whole Silverado Loans company. And then later he makes quite a bit of money off of Securicom. And then after Securicom's involvement all around 9/11, the company ceases to exist. Now Neil Bush, I'm not even sure or not Neil, that's Marvin, what Marvin Bush is really even up to these days. But all I know is that recently endorsed Gary Johnson, which really disturbing for Garrett Johnson for. I mean, I think Garrett Johnson, if he was really what he acts like he is, he would have denounced the endorsement from such a figure, such as Marvin Bush, who was from the Bush crime family, I mean, it's funny when, in the end, the supposed outsider candidate is being criticized more from an insider like Donald Trump. The Bush and Clinton family are getting criticized more from this insider than the supposed outsider, Gary Johnson. I mean, it's only a little bit here and there that Gary Johnson criticizes Bush family and then the Clinton family. I mean, I don't know how true it is, but apparently he said something like that Clinton pretty much was trying to downplay all the horrible stuff that Clinton's done, and I see he focuses quite a bit on Trump, which ultimately is just these are all actors. Hillary, Trump, and Gary. Well, it's starting to look like it, which is really disappointing because, again, like I said a lot of good things about Gary in the past, and he's let a lot of people down. It seems like, and going back to the whole Bush family and all that. Bush family to this day, I think they're starting to become one of the most hated families inside of America because people have caught up to what they are about. People have caught up to the fact that they are a crime syndicate, and people are sick of seeing them in power, positions of power here in Florida. We saw them as the governor of Florida. We saw one is president, the other is president, and we almost saw that one from the governor of Florida, was on his way possibly to become another president. And now we have a Clinton, which is the other one that's another generally disliked family inside this country. But guess what? It looks like one's going to be a president again. And Hillary Clinton, we know when that happens, when she's the president, war with Iran is going to happen. She said, she pretty much pledged it, back in 2007 to AIPAC, one of the most powerful lobby in America, to bomb Iran. That once she's president, it's going to happen. It's a matter of when, and it's not really a matter of when because it's going to be early in her administration. She's not going to wait around very long. And there's a high possibility that you're going to see another false flag precede the invasion of Iran, and they're going to blame it on Iran. I mean, it could be another terrorist attack similar to like 9/11, or it could be something either like what some people said, some kind of a really major event, like something that absolutely shocking. Some people say that it could be a massive bomb's going to go off or something like that in some major city in 2017 or whenever it happens. That's why I believe the false flag is going to happen. It's 2017 next year. I don't think they're going to wait too much longer than that. They've been they're not going to wait. They're not going to wait until the next president of Iran comes about, which I don't think, or they might wait a little bit after. But when Ahmadinejad's back in, and they'll use that because they know that Ahmadinejad scares Americans. So with him as president, it'll be an easy target. And as Ahmadinejad, though I think that the New World Order is really scared of him because they know that he's got what kind of power he has. He's not scared. He doesn't get scared easy by threats by Israel or by the United States. That's not how he rolls for his first 8 years as president. When he comes back to president again, he's not going to get intimidated easily. I think Rouhani is more susceptible to getting intimidated than Ahmadinejad currently, or Ahmadinejad ever was. And I think it will just be the same way once he's president again. Just though you can imagine that any kind of war with the United States and Iran is going to be a giant war, and Israel is going to be involved in that too. And Iran and Syria on the other side, it's going to be an absolutely massive war where it's going to be possibly the entire region engulfed in war. Definitely a few countries in very intense fighting. And Hillary Clinton has pledged that it will happen. And people cheered on. People are not, but guess what? It'll be a woman we're gonna make history by having it will be the first woman to drone the shit out of the Middle East, and maybe the first woman to dropping a nuclear weapon or something like that. Oh yeah, she'll be the first woman to be officially this meaningless position that is the president, be the corporate spokesman of America, and lie to the American public 24/7, and the first women to I don't even know. That's about it, really. That's pretty much sums up. Boy, first woman to be a puppet of the Rothschilds, like she is, or to be that puppet of the Rothschilds, to be in that position. Just checking out on the Twin Towers. That's true. That thing was an engineering marvel that was built to withstand a take from it was tested for it was tested in order to take the impact from a jet, and the thing apparently fell in just a couple hours after taking the impact from the planes. Both of them fell around the same time in free fall speed, just shortly after being hit on 9/11. And we had the Empire State Building was hit by a B-52 in 1945, and it didn't fall down. That building was built in the 1930s. That was the first kind of that would have been the first kind of collapse of a building like that if it actually had happened that way, but with controlled demolition, and that's happened many times. Las Vegas style controlled demolition, pretty much, with people still inside and business still going on as normal, and then the plane supposedly hits, and then afterwards, after a couple hours, they pull it. You hear the New York Fire Department say we got to pull it when you hear the transmissions, and you hear people all over the being interviewed today that were saying that they heard explosions. The cops heard explosions. The firefighters heard explosions. And they had those firefighters and police go up into that building to their deaths, a lot of them. They didn't give a shit, people that were in charge. Then you had Rudy Giuliani that was acting like the hero that brought New York City back together after the 9/11 happened. But ultimately, you know that he, as an insider, was definitely well in on it, and was probably at the same table as the people that really planned it out. Right there was probably the Saudi leader, Netanyahu, or whoever, who was the president back there, or the prime minister of Israel, nothing. Sharon, Bush, Cheney, probably the Rothschilds themselves are probably at that meeting. Jacob Rothschild and UK Prime Minister, that's Blair. Of course, I bet Tony Blair was probably there. Tony Blair, which is known now for his for pretty much was just Bush's little buddy, was the sidekick to Bush during the 2000s, and you know he was in the Labor Party at that time, and he tricked a lot of people because he totally changed the path of the Labor Party where it was going to, and is not quite like the leader of the Labor Party today, or Corbyn, and what at least he supposedly stands for. Corbyn is really try to retract a lot of the stuff that Tony Blair stood for, but I really do question the fact that Livingston and the other person, I think it was she had like a Muslim name, the one that those two got suspended from the Labor Party for supposedly saying anti-Semitic stuff when it was really the stuff they said were just true facts about Israel. One said that Israel was supporting ISIS. I remember that. Actually, there was 3 people that got kicked out of the Labor Party recently. And sorry about that. B-25 missile, or not missile, B-25 plane that crashed into the Empire State Building. The correction thinks Logan Hawk, who made that, caught that. I knew it was, I was like, I was kind of questioning myself, but I thought it sounded right. The plane that hit the Empire State Building back in 1945. And sorry about that. And damn, I completely lost what I was thinking to talk about before I did the correction. But with the World Trade Center collapse, it's been. I mean, actually, it's kind of dawned on me how many years it's been. I mean, next month is a big anniversary. It's gonna have been 15 years since the fear mongering campaign started. Oh yeah, and I remember I was talking about Blair and everybody, Blair and Corbyn. But yeah, then Blair and Bush start the fear mongering campaign in the West, and the only one that really was against the Iraq War in the West is Jacques Chirac, who was the leader of France at the time, and he kind of did a move that kind of resembled like something de Gaulle would do back in the 60s. Now Sarkozy and Hollande had not even close to this kind of spine that de Gaulle had, or even that Chirac had, to oppose the Iraq War, and ton of Western countries get behind the Canadian, forgot who the Canadian Prime Minister at that time was, wasn't Trudeau or Harper, also gets involved in the invasion. They make the coalition, and they start freeing the shit out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Apparently Iraq has some involvement in. They tried to make this crappy, long attempt to try to show this a tie between an Iraqi government official and Al Qaeda, and they do and then they try to, of course, the lie of the Iraqi WMDs. Reminds me, makes me think again of all those Bush moments when Bush would start talking about the nuclear weapons and evildoers who do evil. We're gonna get them hands on them nuclear weapons, and they're gonna make some WMDs over there in Iraq, and they're gonna. I remember the way else he says. I mean, apparently that's the way that a lot of Americans say Qatar is Qatar, or Qatar. You have to put their country accent. Because people say Qatar seem to. That's a southern word. I don't know. Qatar. That's how it looks like. That's how it's fucking spelled. Qatar. Qatar. Yeah, Qatar. I guess that's if you really want to put it like how the English, English pronunciation Qatar. I'm not sure how they pronounce it over there in Arabic, but I'm sure it's close to Qatar is closer than Qatar, which makes it seem like there's a U somewhere in that word. I just think it's not like two U's in the word. I don't know. I'm getting sidetracked on it, but the WMDs, of course, turned out to be a big lie, and ultimately there were no WMDs. They just bounced a big gun out in the middle of the desert, and then we end up going into. I mean, now it's been the numbers of the fatalities. If you just look at that, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But still, 5,000 young Americans that were killed in this Iraq and Afghanistan war. But then you look at the injuries, and it's a lot more. And the people that come home physically or mentally injured, and you're talking about tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands people, and 1.8 million Iraqis was the end result of it all. 1.8 million Iraqis died, which it's like I bring up that number to people, and people don't seem to give a shit. It's like I've tried to tell them is that 1.8 million Iraqis. That's like the entire city of. That's like taking the population of Miami 3 times and killing them all. That's triple the population of Miami dying over there in Iraq in just a matter of 10 years or so. We have all the suicide bombings going up from virtually none that they had prior to the war to tens of thousands that they have in some of these years. You have the number of opium production in Afghanistan went up 5,000%. You have a number of terrorists are most likely going up rather than down. You have which of course is just the CIA. This is the Western intelligence motive. They just continue to boost terrorism, and that's what they like. They like to work with these Islamist groups, take out governments they don't like over there, like the Assad government or the Iranian government over there in the Middle East. That's what they've been using Islamic terrorism for many years. to do, and they did it with Gaddafi. They replaced it with a bunch of terrorists when they sponsored the Libyan rebels. Those guys were moderate rebels? No, they were just like the Syrian rebels. And it's been a thing that they've been doing way back. Even look at the Ottoman Empire. They used the Donme to fight against them. It was sponsored by Western allies over here way back 100 years ago. Donme, they were like ISIS. They weren't even from the region. They were, a lot of them, I think, were Jews, and they pretended to be Islamists, and they were fighting against the Ottoman government, and they also fought against the Christian population, like the Syrian rebels do in Syria, and they kill Christians and they even crucify Christians. The Ottomans were killing Christians inside of Armenia, and they were the ones responsible for the Armenian genocide. And then later, the world used the Armenian genocide idea in order to, or the history books later, to discredit the Ottoman Empire as a whole, and to detract from the fact that the Ottoman Empire kept Palestine and fought against the Zionists back in the early 1900s. In fact, the Zionists offered the Sultan $150 million, and he wouldn't take it. He pretty much told him to fuck off, and that there was no amount of money that he could be bought out with, and he didn't get bought out. The Sultan of Turkey, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And then now it's just Turkey, and then you have this ultimately, and hasn't proven himself not to be the current president of Turkey, or the prime minister, or it's prime minister. No, he's a president of Turkey, to not be a Zionist crony who ultimately at this point just is one of the top 10 traitors of Israel, with Israel, and he has helped the Israelis do their agenda over there in Syria. I mean, he hasn't proved until he proves himself. A lot of people are saying that he's about to change. That after this coup, he's changed over. He's going to revert a lot of the bad stuff he's done. For one thing, it's almost impossible to revert all the bad stuff he's done. I mean, he's responsible for thousands of deaths inside of Syria, thousands of political prisoners inside of his country over the years. He's banned the media he's closed down social media many times in this country, and ultimately they have unofficial executions for people that oppose his regime, even though that there's no death penalty in this country, which he now wants to bring back for the coup plotters, which he arrested thousands and thousands of people. I mean, it was well in the thousands, the amount of people that were arrested after the coup in Turkey, which you have to wonder, were all these people actually involved with the coup, or are they just any enemies to the government of Erdogan, that they're using the coup to arrest, as an excuse to arrest them right now. And somebody mentioned it. 1.8 million is 0.8 million more than Montana, so it's the entire state of Montana's population being killed off. I just brought to Miami because that's just somebody that people around here, talking directly to people around in Florida, they know is the population. And it's like a major city. You think of it as a major city. And when you think of that a major city like that, triple the population of that were killed off during the Iraq War. And how many more are going to have deformities? How many more did they have chemical weapons dropped on them? White phosphorus was dropped on them. How many people were? How many more people are going to die later from the bad effects of the Iraq War, and the amount of people that all the terrible stuff they did, all the dirty tactics. I mean, it's like the Vietnam War when Monsanto, who created Agent Orange and stuff, that's practically anti-life spray. I mean, the stuff kills off jungles in days, and it also has bad effects on people as well. It caused many, many deformities that added to the 600,000 Vietnamese killed, and now you have all these. Thousands and thousands of children that were born with deformities and had shortened lives afterwards. That's what I'm talking about, is the potential future casualties in any kind of in this Iraq war going down the road, what we're looking at, and all the people, also our own soldiers as well, that are tricked into this game and actually thought that they were fighting for freedom and protecting this country from this outside threat that they reiterated over and over and over again. But again, there's one outside threat that we have to worry about. And it's not really an outside threat when it comes to this government. This government is definitely in on it. But this outside threat is Israel. There's one country in the Middle East that Americans have to worry about. They're the ones with 411 nuclear weapons, and they got their button on. They got their finger on the button, ready to press it if their country, if they feel like that the world's finally waking up to their scam. And the world has woken up to the scam. It's when the world starts to act on it. And what I mean by the world is probably going to be Russia, or if they actually go down there and invade. I worry. It's like I feel like there's no ways that we're in a quagmire at this point with Israel. Is that if Israel's actually to be dealt with, they might just press the dead man's key and screw us all. And at the last moment, press the red button. That's the thing I truly worry about with this whole. I feel like they can be defeated, but it's going to take some really, and that's why I'm not some kind of general or something like that, because I don't know how that is even possible. I feel like they're going to one day they have to be. It just has to be. They are scum. I'm talking about their government and a lot of their people as well. Not all of their people inside of there. The Israelis. They're sociopaths. They're psychopathic. They are murderous scum. They're sadistic. They get off on the pain of suffering of the Palestinian people, Arabic people all around the world. They have caused problems all around the world with Mossad doing dirty work from Asia over to South America and Argentina. They've done false flag operations all around the world, and people know very little about it, partially because the Bushes and the Project for a New American Century have made it to the status where you cannot question Israel under any circumstances. And they have made it where, at this point, that your life will be. They make it where you can suffer some serious consequences in your own personal life if you, with your job, your family, and a lot of other stuff, if you start to question Israel, because that's how much grip they have on this country. And the United States government as well, in the Saudis are the big trio, the dirty trio in the Middle East and the dirty trio around the world. And of course, the New World Order and the Rothschilds being at the head of all of it. I was showing one of my friends the other day a picture of the Rothschilds. Showing they couldn't recognize who they are. He actually heard about the Rothschilds, but he didn't really look up about the actual pictures of them or whatever. He didn't recognize them. He recognized the only one. He said he only recognized Jacob when he sees them. It's like, because you don't see him despite being the world's richest family, you don't see him ever come onto the media. You don't see him ever come up on your television. You see all the stories about the Trump's wealth or whatnot, but the Rothschilds' wealth would blow everyone's away. It's the Rothschilds. They stay in the shadows. The Rothschilds, they stay hidden, because if the people were to know what they're responsible for, millions of people would go and track them down and chop off their fucking heads. People would be so outraged if they knew the truth about who the Rothschilds are in the New World Order. And the same thing's the Rockefellers and other ones. If people knew who the people that really are in control of the United States and these Western governments, if people knew who these people were, everybody would be in some serious. Everyone involved with that New World Order racket would be in serious danger. And they would. It's like what George H.W. Bush said, mentioning the Bushes in this whole show about their family. If the American people would find out what we've been responsible for, they would chase us down and lynch us. And the one Rothschild does look like it. I think Mr. Burns from the Simpsons is actually was based on Jacob Rothschild. I think that the resemblance is uncanny. I mean, they look it's creepy. It's like a cartoon version of Mr. Rothschild, and a lot of the thing is, Mr. Burns is still not. If you haven't captured the full evilness of the actual Rothschild with Mr. Burns. I mean, I think Mr. Burns doesn't have like a few seconds here and there of actual human empathy, and the amount it's like 100 times more evil Mr. Rothschild compared to Mr. Burns. Plus, Mr. Burns is shown as wealthy, but not quite in charge of most of the world like Mr. Rothschild is. I mean, Mr. Rothschild has a lot more power than Mr. Burns has in the Simpsons universe. But oh yeah, we're already at 10:55. Wow, show really flew by today. But I think I think a little bit when you think about the Simpsons and some of the stuff that's been shown on there. For example, like the 9/11 thing in 1997. I don't think it's coincidental, really, that some of these things are shown years before on the Simpsons before it actually happens, and I think it's predictive programming to an extent. Some of the stuff's not, like there was one thing that was debunked, like the Trump 2000, where they predict Trump running for president. It wouldn't even have been really that predictive, considering that Trump was running for president or was about to run for president that year, but he backed out at the last second. The Trump thing's from recent. That's like that happened after the announcement. Somebody just put the year 2000 on there, but the good animation that when you watch the earlier Simpsons, they look kind of, I don't know, the animation's just not as good. The frames per second, everything was a little bit off compared to what you see into the 2015 with Donald Trump running. Yeah, it should be an automatic. It should be automatically tell you that's actually from 2015 or not 2000. But there's been a few other things like that 9/11 thing that was from 97, and it just apparently in the 11's made out of the Twin Towers. And I think I wonder why though that they would want to even leak some of the stuff out, and I don't know if it's like a test. I think sometimes they leak some, like why the false flags are not as really that good and they're poor quality, just to see how many Americans catch up to how fake they are. Like for example, especially like when you saw, and I'll say that the Orlando shooting, you see this guy being let down after he was supposedly shot, and you saw the red shoes guy. That's all you have to look up on YouTube. Orlando shooting red shoes guy or whatever. Put that on YouTube. Look that up on YouTube, and it comes up. Or what about the fact of the people are being carried the wrong way? You look at Google Maps; they're being carried towards the club, and why are they being carried like they're? I don't even know what kind of victim you carry like that. But ask any paramedic or anything like that. You don't carry an injured victim like that by their limbs. Anyways, they wouldn't be advised to do that. The paramedics would tell them, hey, let us take care of it, because you might give him a spinal injury. I mean, if the guy was not dead by the time that they picked him up and were taking him to the ambulance, he was definitely dead by the time he got to the ambulance. People doing that. I find it funny how I take 1 second, I look away from the chat room, and they're talking about the Fabergé eggs or something like that. I didn't even mention anything with the Tsar or the Bolsheviks today. So, because I'm from St. Pete, and St. Pete.
Running no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights, when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return. And if I back down